The shortest way home is always on or near the inside rail. Technically, that's true. We all know it. But we also know it doesn't always find you the winner of a race, especially when the track's on the very wet side. That's when you'll see the horses being taken deliberately wide by their jockeys, hunting for firmer going away from the rail. And even on tracks rated only dead or slow, you'll see horses win after racing wide the whole way. Why? Because the surface has been uneven, the footing getting better the wider out a horse is raced. So let's get back to barrier draws and how much they really matter, and more importantly, how much they matter to your form study and analysis. You can't get away from it. For a great percentage of races, it's better to be drawn close to the rails. The percentages back that up. Most races are won by horses coming from the 10th gate inwards. But that statistic only helps you up to a point, because every race is a different ballgame, with different horses of different ability and pace. Take a slow beginner, drawn on the rails in a big field. He's really at a disadvantage. The fast beginners outside him get every chance to cut across and chop him off, and suddenly he's in an impossible position to win from. And it's been my experience that here in Australia, not enough attention gets paid by the rank-and-file punter to pace from the barrier. By that, I mean this. Few punters really weigh up how a race is going to be run, which horse will lead, which ones will sit just off the pace, which will get trapped wide, which will drift back and then have to make up ground late. Those are the questions you've got to ask if you want a clear picture in your mind of how the race will unfold. You might end up being wrong, but you'll be right more often than not, as long as you apply the right principles of form and honest, rational analysis. Now, here's one point you must never forget when you're weighing up a barrier draw. A horse forced to race wide around the turns has to cover more ground than the runners inside him. And that extra ground can be the difference between winning and losing. Because at a lot of our tracks, you can lose plenty by tracking deep. You can do a simple test yourself if you need convincing. Picture a race course with the back straight and the home straight taken away, just the turns left. Buck those turns together and you've got a circle. Let's say that circle's 800 metres around. Now start one horse against the rail and another out in the middle of the track, about 15 metres off the rail. If both horses run at exactly the same speed, the outside horse finishes about 43 lengths behind. And here's what surprises people: how little a horse has to come off the rail to make an enormous difference. Take our rails runner. Hold him tight against the fence at 12 seconds to the 200, and he runs the 800 in 48 seconds flat. Run him at exactly the same speed, but 4 metres off the rail, and his time blows out to 49.5. And 4 metres off the fence is nothing unusual. It happens all the time in real races. In a race, a horse runs in a lane about 1 metre wide. He takes up about 1 metre of the track. To get past him, the next horse has to go at least 1 metre further out, and a jockey is often forced to bring his mount 5, 6, even 7 horses wide on a turn. It's nothing then to find a horse racing 5 to 7 metres off the inside rail. Now, there are different opinions on exactly how much ground a horse loses out there. Let's start with Paul Seeger, author of Horse Racing Theory and Practice. He puts it like this: horses that can take up a good position from anywhere have early speed. Like a car, the jockey just puts his foot on the accelerator. The better class galloper can turn the speed on at any point in the race. From any barrier, by jumping out well, a horse succeeds more easily. But a horse that misses the jump, even by half a length, is usually under pressure straight away and is often beaten a long way from home. On how much ground you lose racing wide, Seeger says it depends on a few things: how long the race is, how many turns there are, and how long the horse is caught wide. 1 metre extra, he reckons, works out to about 1/3 of a length. So a horse covering 4.5 metres extra is about 1.5 lengths worse off, and 9 metres extra is worth about 3 lengths. In weights, that's roughly 2.25 kilos and 4.5 kilos. With that kind of extra handicap on his back, Seeger says it's no wonder so many horses get beaten when they race wide. Race very wide, and you can be losing a couple of lengths every single time you go round a turn. The professional punting king, Don Scott, goes into real detail on wide runners and barriers in his bestseller, Winning More. In fact, one of his main maxims in race form study is this: some outside barrier positions are a disadvantage, and that disadvantage can be expressed in kilograms. Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. Scott says, although an outside barrier tends to be a disadvantage, it's often not as big a one as punters believe. Some experts produce statistics showing most winners start from inside barriers, but those stats give a false picture because the inside barriers are filled in every single race, while the outside gates are only occupied when the fields are big. So treat all these theories and statistics with caution, Scott says. The barrier is just one factor. Don't give it undue importance. A good horse, well-weighted and well-ridden, can overcome the disadvantage of a wide draw. And Scott backs that up. While some punters flatly refuse to back anything drawn wider than 8 or 12 or 15, depending on how fanatical they are, Scott says he's backed scores of winners from out in no man's land. One of the most memorable, Citadel at 100 to 1 in the 1974 Epsom. On how much ground you actually lose, Scott points to one expert's calculation. Running too wide on the home turn at Randwick costs a horse 1.42 metres, about 56 inches, just over half a length. On that basis, you'd compensate a horse too wide 1 kilo, 3 wide 1.5 kilos, 4 wide 2.5, 5 wide 3 kilos, and so on. Scott's own allowances are actually less than the ground truly lost. In his book, he splits them in two: wide running on the early turns and wide running on the home turn. So say your horse was caught 5 wide at the first turn on a fast track, Scott would allow 1 kilo. Say he was 6 wide at the final turn, Scott would allow 3. Put them together and this horse earns a 4 kilo bonus for that wide running effort when you rate him for next time. So there's no doubt barriers play a big part in whether a horse can win, but probably not such a dominant part that you can start making sweeping assertions. You can't dismiss a horse from your calculations just because he's drawn barrier 18 in a field of 18. The famous American turf expert Lou Holloway once put it perfectly: you can't blithely accept statistics or the law of averages in racing because every race is a separate entity with different variables. A horse drawn wide might lose in one race, but in the next, in a completely different set of circumstances, another horse from that same wide gate, in that same size field, will win. Holloway's exactly right, but the punter doesn't have the luxury of picking apart every single race in that kind of detail. He needs some basic approaches to handle the wide barrier problem, and the best place to turn is Don Scott's barrier tables in Winning More, and more recently in his terrific book, Winning in the 90s. Scott dissects every major city and provincial track in every state and sets out penalties for horses racing from wide barriers. Use those alongside your own knowledge of the horse, and you can track pretty accurately just how much a barrier will affect any individual runner. Here's how that works. Say you're looking at an early speed horse drawn barrier 15 over 1,200 metres at Randwick. You know this bloke explodes out of the gates, and you reckon he's got enough pace to lead inside the first 100 to 150 metres. You check Scott's charts, and he's allowed a 1 kilo penalty for a horse drawn 15 over 1,200 at Randwick. Now you've got a decision. Do you give him that full kilo? Do you cut it to half? Or do you wipe it out altogether? Maybe you decide the wide gate is no problem at all, given how quickly he pings away. Or maybe you decide that even with the early speed, that wide draw forces him to go just a shade too hard too early, leaving him with less in reserve when the pressure comes on in that testing final 300. My own observations are these. Horses drawn 1 to 7 should be suitably placed, unless you can make a case for a slow beginner in a sprint being chopped off from, say, 1 to 3. Even then, you've got to ask whether it actually helps him. A late closer being forced out of the early rush might be no bad thing at all. Horses drawn 8 to 11 are getting into the midways. That's where you start giving some thought to penalties, depending on the trip, the shape of the track, the run to the first turn, and the horse's own racing style. And once you're out from barrier 12, that's where you strike more and more imponderables. So I reckon every serious punter should own Don Scott's barrier charts, and at the very least use them as a reference guide. You don't have to take his penalties at face value. Treat them as a tool for your form study, and adjust them as you see fit. Just always remember this: barrier draws are important, but don't get carried away with some all-embracing rule about them. Treat every case on its merits. Wide draws can be fatal, but not all the time. And when it comes to wide running on the turns, never forget, those horses do cover more ground, so think about a compensatory form allowance for it. Now, everything we've covered today, the draw, the pace, and just how much ground a horse really loses out wide, the researchers have put the whole lot into a free ebook. The link's right below this video, and it won't cost you a cent. All it takes is an email address. Grab it, keep it beside your form guide, and next time you're weighing up a wide draw, you'll have the whole method right there in your pocket.